Hi, good morning. Good morning. Welcome back. Hope you had a wonderful break, that you took time to recover, to de-stress. And as it happens, this is the topic today, or we'll continue from where we left off before break. So, remember we talked about the idea that, in fact, stress wasn't the problem, which was the most interesting, surprising, but in retrospect, obvious finding of the research on stress. That stress in and of itself is actually good. Just like in athletics, just like in sports, when we stress a muscle, the muscle develops, it grows. When we stress ourselves psychologically, emotionally, we grow, we become more resilient, we become stronger. It is not good for a person who's just born to be put in a sterile environment and be protected from all the stresses of the outside world, such as bacteria, for example, which stresses the system because it forces it to create antibodies. It's not good for us to be in a sterile environment, not physically, whether it's in a closed environment as babies, not physically in terms of not doing any sports, not pushing ourselves, and also not mentally and emotionally, which is why I said, time and again, I wish that you fail more, because I think it is important to go through hardships, through difficulties. And in fact, we're going to talk about failure right after we finish up with the goal-setting lecture, when we discuss perfectionism, which is all about our approach toward failure. So stress is not the problem. The problem is lack of recovery, and that is what we don't have enough of in our culture, not just at Harvard. In most workplaces, there is not enough place for recovery. In most schools, most universities, which explains why levels of stress translate themselves to chronic stress, translate themselves to chronic anxiety, translate themselves to depression. It's because we don't have the recovery. And we talked about recovery on a few levels. So just a quick recap. We talked about recovery on the micro level, which is, for example, every 90 minutes of sprint, 15 minutes break. Instead of being marathon runners, being sprinters. It's a 15-minute meditation. It's a 1-hour lunch where we really give ourselves time to recover. It's going to the gym on a regular basis. It's the 15-minute listening to our favorite piece of music, speaking to a friend or whatever it is, the recovery on the micro level. And people who recover, who have recoveries during their workday, and this is research done across the river by people like Teresa Amabile or Leslie Perlow, show how important it is in the workplace to have recoveries. And people who do it are more productive, more creative, and in the long term, also happier. Higher levels of job satisfaction. Recovery also on the meso level, the full night's sleep. The day off during once a week at least. Time off, recreate so that we can create. And finally, the vacations, holidays, longer periods. You see, the other thing that happens when we are constantly on the run is that we miss the beauty that's all around us and within us. We miss the real potential for happiness, for joy, for appreciation that surrounds us day in and day out. And that's why we take things for granted, because we don't take the time to appreciate, to savor. And it's not natural to do so. I mean, can you imagine a lion living in our modern world? Can you imagine a lion working at McKinsey or in investment banking or being on the tenure track? It's unnatural. What a lion needs to do is yawn. They need to play. It is natural. And remember what we talked about during the first couple of lectures. The constraint view of human nature. Nature to be commanded must be obeyed. Our nature dictates that we need recovery. All animals do. frustrate a psychological, physical need, we pay a price for it. Whether it's the need for recovery or the need for physical exercise or the need for certain vitamins or protein, we pay a price for it. And the key is to introduce these natural recovery periods into our lives. And here is the key. The key is focus. Focus on both work as well as recovery. So remember the question that we asked before break. What makes some individuals succeed despite living in the modern world or living with ambition and success? Well, these individuals know how to focus when they work and when they play. To use a cliche, they work hard and they play hard. What does that mean specifically? First of all, in recovery, they understand that quantity affects quality. Let me share with you a study that you read about in the book. This is by Nobel Prize winner, the Israeli psychologist Daniel Kahneman. Won a Nobel Prize for economics, turned positive psychologist. What he wanted to understand was the affective, the emotional experiences of women during the day. And what he did was ask women to evaluate their experiences right after they had that particular experience. So what was it like for you? And they evaluated their experience at work, they evaluated their experience shopping, they evaluated their experience spending time with their intimate partners, with their children, having lunch with friends, whatever it was. They evaluated how they were doing during the day. And the most surprising finding of this result was that these women did not particularly enjoy time they spent with their kids. Now, this result was very surprising to Kahneman, and when he probed further, he and his co-authors, it wasn't the fact that the women didn't love their kids. I mean, they loved their kids. For most of these women, kids were the most meaningful, important thing in their lives. However, their experience with their kids often was not pleasurable, the second component of happiness. Very meaningful, but not always pleasurable. Why? When they probed further, they found out exactly why. Because these women, when they were with their kids, they were not really with their kids. Meaning, they were on the phone at the same time, or doing email, or thinking about what they did earlier at work, or what they have to do later at home. They were distracted, and they were not present with their kids. Now, individually, discreetly, they may have really enjoyed being on the phone with a friend, or doing work, or thinking about work, or thinking about what they have to do later. Each discrete individual activity may have been a lot of fun, but together it was too much of a good thing. And quantity affects quality. I mean, think about the following analogy. Think about your favorite piece of music and listen to it with your eyes closed and focused. So your favorite piece of music, if it's like mine, probably is, it's Whitney Houston's And I Will Always Love You. Thank you. Yes, there's another one here with good taste in music. And you listen to Whitney Houston or whatever your favorite piece of music is, your eyes closed and you focus, and then you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And of course, perfect 10. You're touched, you're moved, you're inspired. And then you listen to your second most favorite piece of music, which, if it is like mine, it's the chorus piece from Beethoven's Ninth. And you listen to it, you focus on it, and again you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Not quite And I Will Always Love You, but it's a 9.5. And then, for maximal effect, you take the two pieces together and play them. And what do you get? A 19.5, right? No, not a 10, not even a 5. It's noise. This is modern life for you. This is modern life. We have activities, we have so many wonderful things in our lives, but we have too many of them. And you know what that often does? It very often leads to guilt and frustration. Why? Because I say to myself, how is that possible? I love doing what I'm doing. I'm so fortunate to have so many amazing, wonderful things, people, experiences in my life, and yet I fail to be happy. There must be something wrong with me. No, there's nothing wrong with you. It's perfectly natural. Just like you will not be able to enjoy the two pieces of music played together, even though individually they're your two most favorite pieces of music. Too much of a good thing. Quantity does affect quality. You know, this happens constantly. And it happened to me 2 years ago when I was teaching positive psych. It was about 1 month into the semester, and it just didn't make sense to me. Why wasn't I happy? The class was doing well. I was enjoying the class. I was doing a lot of work, consulting. I was speaking around the country about positive psychology, about Israel. I was writing and doing all the things that I love, that I care about, that I'm passionate about. Spending time with my family. Then I took a step back and I realized too much of a good thing. And as soon as I cut the activities, happiness level went back up again. Quantity affects quality. Researchers on relationships and love, the Hendricks couple, say, love and sex are affected negatively by stress. If we can help people to simplify their lives, thus reducing their stress levels, it is very likely that people's relationships would be enriched greatly. Moreover, the positive aspects of their lives would be enriched accordingly. It affects every area of our lives, whether it's our love life, whether it's our experience with our kids, whether it's our experience doing work or reading, spending time with friends, or writing. There can be too much of a good thing. So if we have lunch, and we use lunch as recovery, and at the same time we're on the phone and doing email, that's not recovery, that's simply more stress. But if we have just lunch and focus on our eating and enjoy it, or just spend time with people we love, that's recovery. The key is focus. The same thing applies to work. Now, it's not possible in our world today, certainly not in leadership positions, which many of you have already got and will assume in the future. It's not possible to eliminate multitasking. The key, though, is to reduce it. Just a quick show of hands. How many people here, while you're doing work that requires concentration, that requires focus, whether it's writing or doing reading or anything else that requires concentration, how many people here have their emails on at the same time? Okay, it's the majority. It's most people in the West who do that. I used to do that too, until I found out about this research. When you have your email on while you're doing work that requires concentration, it is equivalent to taking off 10 IQ points. 10 IQ points. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't spare 10 IQ points. Now, for comparison's sake, if you lose a whole night's sleep, so if you haven't slept for 36 hours, your IQ is reduced by the equivalent of 10 points. Another point of comparison, if you smoke marijuana, if you smoke grass, your IQ is reduced by 4 points. So if you have, look, I mean, it's the choice. More fun, less IQ point, well, but don't inhale. And I hope you didn't record that there. Here is the study. This was done at the, in the University of London. The IQ of those who try to juggle messages and work fell by 10 points, the equivalent of missing a whole night's sleep and more than double the 4-point fall seen after smoking marijuana. Look, nothing will happen if you switch off your email for 2 hours at a time. Nothing will, except for one thing will happen. You'll get another message saying, you know, the server may have been down earlier, so I'm not sure you got my email. Right, you get those emails if you don't respond for about an hour or two? The server may have been down. But other than that, nothing will happen if you don't respond to emails, if you don't have your emails on for 2-3 hours. Nothing will happen if you don't answer the phone every moment. Unless you're an ambulance driver, in which case you should have it on. But otherwise, it's fine. Switch it off. Doing less. And when you do less, you get so much more done. Creativity goes up. Productivity goes up. Work satisfaction goes up. Because when we're distracted, there can be too much of a good thing. I've spoken about so many techniques already, and we'll speak about some more, about journaling, about doing gratitude exercise, about writing a gratitude letter. I'm going to talk about doing more physical exercise. We talked about acts of kindness and so many things. But really the key thing is actually not to do additional things, but to do less. Or rather to identify the things that you really, really want to do with your life and do them. Because quantity affects quality. Tim Castor, a humanistic psychologist, has done research on time affluence. As we know from research, material affluence matters very little to our well-being. Beyond having our basic needs met, hardly even affects our well-being. However, what does affect our well-being is what Castor calls time affluence, which is the feeling that we have time, the feeling that we can savor the things that we're doing, that we're not constantly chasing our own shadow, that we're not constantly running around and feeling stressed. And people who have time affluence in their lives, that is a good predictor of well-being. And that is something that we can introduce. Granted, more difficult in a place like this where there are so many appealing distractions. And I'm using the word distractions here, even though many of these things may be wonderful, amazing, meaningful things to you. But when they all come together, it becomes, unfortunately, the experience of distraction. In our modern world, functionality is being pitted against fun. The question is, how do you make our life fun as well as functionality, which is parallel to the present and future benefit? And what we know is that when we have recovery, fun recovery in our lives, listening to our favorite piece of music and only listening to our favorite piece of music, and one at a time, or having lunch with friends or a nice dinner in our house with our roommates, when we savor the time together, it's not just fun, it's also functional. It's also a form of recovery. And the question is, how do you reconcile? How do you do the end? Because remember the question that positive psychologists ask, what do people who are happy, healthy, and successful do? And once they started to ask this question, it opened up all the possibilities. All the answers came rushing in, literally. And one of the answers is focus on work, focus on recovery. You'll get much more done and much better. One of the shortest, if not the shortest word in the English language, and yet people are so afraid of it, saying no. Whether it's saying no to people who ask you something, again, saying no empathically, or saying no to opportunities. Because essentially when we're saying no to some opportunities, when we're saying no to some offers, we're saying yes to ourselves. And how do we choose what we say no to and what we say yes to? By simply asking, what do I really, really, really want to do? Simplifying, doing less rather than more. The key, though, is to reach optimum levels of simplicity, because we don't want to simplify too much and go to the other extreme. You see, in a way, it works as many things work, many psychological phenomena work in a curvilinear manner. Let me explain. So let's say we have a graph where this is amount of work, and on this axis we have productivity, creativity, and happiness. The way it works, the way it looks is this way. Meaning, if our amount of work is too high, that's when we experience the TBD, too busy disorder. We're unhappy, we're not creative, and we're not productive. This is the burnout. We may be productive and creative for a short while, but this is the burnout phase. On the other hand, if we do too little, that's also not good. And very similar consequences. We're unhappy, we're certainly not productive, and we're not creative. This is extreme procrastination, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is overwork. What we want to find is our optimum. For each person, this is in a different place. I mean, this graph can be situated here for one person and here for another. But each person has this optimal level. And this is where highest level of productivity, creativity, and happiness. So on the one extreme, we have the law of gases essentially applied to time management. But even if we have very little work, it will take up all of our time. And then we're not productive, not creative, not happy. On the other hand, we have the quote that I've used time and again by J.P. Morgan, that he can do a year's work in 9 months but not in 12, and the need for time off. Where is your optimal level? Where are you between these two? You need to find out. It's trial and error. And it's a lot of error. And that's okay. That's how we learn. Essentially what we're about is sustainable growth. Henry David Thoreau, simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen. In the midst of this chopping sea of civilized life, such are the clouds and storms and quicksands and the 1,001 items to be allowed for. And he must be a great calculator indeed who succeeds. Simplify, simplify. This was written around 1840. How much more do we need to simplify today in the 21st century? And what we are about, again, is sustainable growth. I've used this metaphor from environmentalism. What's sustainable growth? So when a country like Senegal is now talking about sustainable growth, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that it wants to freeze progress. It means that it wants to grow. However, in a sustainable way, which means let's take out of the environment what can be replenished naturally through our help. The exact same thing we're talking about on the psychological level. We're not talking about a stress-free life, a life where we don't take out of ourselves, when we don't push ourselves, when we don't exert ourselves. What we're talking about when we talk about sustainable growth is that we take out of ourselves, we exert, we stress ourselves, and replenish through recovery. Just enough so that it's sustainable. Because if we don't replenish, then it's not sustainable, and then we begin to experience anxiety, depression, burnout, and so on. So ask yourself, where do I in my life need to simplify? Where do I in my life need to do more? How can I, in other words, overcome procrastination? Going back to our friend. Because this may be a little bit too extreme. You know that 70%, more than 70% of college students nationwide complain about procrastination. Not others' procrastination, their own procrastination. The other 30% are in denial. No. Over 70%. Now, procrastination is associated with lower levels of happiness, weakened physical immune system, higher levels of stress, and could also lead to depression. Not a very high correlation, but there is a positive correlation between the two. Fortunately, though, there's a lot of research on procrastination, and research that can actually help. And the research is done at the University of Carleton in Canada, where they have an actual procrastination research group. And I browsed them. You can go on their website, great website, and there are great pictures there. And one of the set of pictures is from their yearly conference on procrastination, which is remarkable. So here are some photos from that very important conference. So on the first day, they all arrived and they got together for a meal. And after they got together for a meal, they had another meal because they were hungry a few hours later. And then the following day, they just hung out and walked around. It was a beautiful place after all. And afterwards, they had some food together. And then, food begets food, so they ate some more. And at the end of the conference, they really felt like they accomplished a lot. They practiced what they preached, so they had a photo and all of them together right here. Actually, they do fascinating work and very important work on procrastination. So here are some of the results, some of the important results for overcoming procrastination. First, most important one, simple, easy to implement, and it works, is what they call the 5-minute takeoff. One of the things that they found with just about all procrastinators is that they have a misunderstanding of what it takes to act. Procrastinators the world over think that in order to act, they first need to be inspired. I have to feel the vibes before I start this Act 10 problem set. I really have to be inspired before I write this paper for Lit and Art. But you know what? That's not how it works. That's not how it works. It's not about first changing our attitude, i.e. becoming inspired, and then acting. It usually works the other way around. We first need to start acting behavior that will then affect our attitude, because very often once we start, we're on a roll. Or sometimes a few times during, let's say, the 9-minute sprint, we have to restart the 5 minutes. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you haven't, it's something that I'd really like to share with you. By now, we know one another pretty well, or you know me pretty well. So, if you don't know this, I think you should know this. I am extremely passionate about positive psychology. I love positive psychology. But sometimes when I get up in the morning and I write something about positive psychology or prepare a lecture on positive psychology or read positive psychology, sometimes I don't feel like starting. This was actually a very big surprise for my wife, and it only came up just a couple of years into our marriage, where I told her, sometimes I really don't feel like getting up. She said, how's that possible? I mean, you get up in the morning and then you go to your computer and you start to work on it. Yes, exactly, because I know the 5-minute takeoff. And sometimes within a 90-minute session, I have to do another 5-minute takeoff because my energy levels are drained. So either take time off to recover, or if I think that it's just procrastination, I say, okay, for 5 minutes, just push. And very often that 5 minutes starts an upward spiral. Not through the mind, not through the heart, through action. The 5-minute takeoff, probably the most useful technique for overcoming procrastination. Just do it, in other words. Reward yourself. Businesses are built. Can you imagine a business without a reward? Well, think about the Self Inc. You're a certain business. You want to motivate yourself. So reward yourself. Okay, I'm going to do 3 hours of work now, and then allow myself a 3-hour meal in the dining hall as a reward. Or I'm going to really work hard on Friday so that Saturday I can go out. That's okay. We do it in every other place. But no, again, we say, no, I need to be inspired for this problem set. Yes, sometimes, but sometimes we're not that inspired. And rewards are certainly legit and important. Go public. Throw your knapsack over the wall. Tell people what you're going to achieve. This is exactly what I did in 1995 when I first decided to teach workshops in psychology. I was working in Singapore at the time. I called up my boss, Mr. Hugh Hong, and I said to him, Hugh, I want to teach a workshop, or 2-day workshops, one on leadership, one on the pursuit of excellence, on success. And he said, that's great. I think it will really help the employees. When do you want to do it by? I said, July 1. This was January of 2005. And he said, fine. Put down the phone. I called him. I was here at the time. I called him up. And as soon as I put down the phone, I said, oh, shoot. What have I just done? One of the best things that I ever did. Because I went public with it. I threw my knapsack over the wall, and I had to start working, whether I liked it or not. And that helped me overcome procrastination, because I knew that I wanted to teach at some point, but when I went public with it, in a sense, it forced me to do it. And I gave a workshop. It wasn't the best workshop in July of 1995, but I did it, and I worked extremely hard toward it. The team approach. The best predictor, for example, of maintaining an exercise regime is doing it with other people. Now, this is not right for everyone. Some people, exercise is something that they want to do by themselves, just with their Discman or just by themselves at home. And that's okay. However, for most people, doing it with other people actually helps. It also helps to write down. This is a commitment. Write down goals, divide and conquer, break down achievement. Remember Langer's research? Write these things down. Make lists. They actually help most people. And finally, permission to recreate. What that means is that give yourself permission to be human. Give yourself permission to procrastinate at times as well. Give yourself permission to recover. You're not a machine. We're not machines. We need to understand the constraint view of nature. Because if we don't understand it, if we don't respect nature, nature is not going to respect us. And we're going to pay a price in terms of our productivity, our creativity, as well as our happiness, the ultimate currency. I want to show you a quick excerpt by my favorite, Ellen DeGeneres. And this is the end of her show on procrastination, which I highly, highly recommend. You can find it in any of the video stores around here. So here she is, the end of the show, after she has talked about procrastination for over an hour. The one and only.
We're doing all these things to squeeze things together so we can save time. And I don't know about you, but I don't have any more time. I have less time. But let's just say we could save up a whole chunk of time and set it aside. You know what we do with it? Nothing. Nothing at all. Isn't that the point, to be able to do nothing at all? But we're not guaranteed that later on chunk of time. All we have is here and now. And that's why procrastination feels so right. Procrastination is not the problem. It is the solution. It is the universe's way of saying, stop, slow down, you move too fast. Listen to the music. Whoa, whoa, listen to the music. What I'm trying to say is, if you leave here tonight and you don't remember anything else that I said, leave here and remember this. Procrastinate now. Don't put it off.
Okay. Out of everything that I teach, this lecture, this topic is the most personally meaningful to me. Because in many ways, my shift, my journey from perfectionism, and it's an ongoing journey, a journey that it goes on right now as we speak. My journey from perfectionism to the pursuit of excellence is most intimately linked with my journey toward becoming happier. So I want to share with you some personal things that I've been through. Some of them are in my book, but I want to expand the story beyond squash. So I started playing squash at the age of 11, which was after giving up an illustrious, passionate career as a basketball star. It was about that time when I realized that NBA was not going to happen for me. I started playing squash and almost immediately started playing every day. My days revolved, my life at that time revolved around squash. I would wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and go for a run. I would come home, have my food, go to school. Right after school, it was next to the squash, not far from the squash courts. I would go to the squash courts, play with my coach, work out in the gym, play games, and then late afternoon I would go home, do my homework, and then go to sleep. For years, this was my pattern. It was difficult, it was tough, especially the interval training workouts with my coach. However, it was nothing. The toughness was nothing compared to the emotional difficulties at the time. I was constantly, with almost no recovery, no reprieve, I was constantly stressed. There was always a knot that I felt in my stomach. It was real, as if there was a ball here. The knot was especially pronounced, especially difficult after a poor performance in practice, when it didn't match to the standards that I had for myself. And it almost never matched. The knot was at its severest during tournaments. Very often I would get to a final of an important tournament and choke and lose the final, even at times when I was supposed to win, on paper at least. That knot didn't go away. When it went away, it was only for very short periods of time. But I knew that that knot would go away. And I was sustained by the belief, by the vision, by my personal mission at the time of winning the Israeli national championships. I said to myself, if I win this, then I'll be happy. Then I will be calm. And it's all going to be worth it. Why? Because no pain, no gain. In 1986, I reached the final of the Israeli national championships. And I lost. I was devastated. I was devastated even though I was the youngest player to ever reach the final, even though I had beaten players higher than me on the rankings. I was devastated for months. But still, I went on. No pain, no gain. And I continued to train and work hard. In 1987, I met the same player in the final, and this time I won. I was ecstatic, joyous, happier than I'd ever remembered myself being. And at that moment I said to myself, it all paid off. It was all worth it. Because now I was ready to be happy.